Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. On this episode, I decided to put up an interview I did probably when this is being released. It's probably been about 3 months ago now. And it's an interview I did with my friend Mike from his podcast, Mikeadelic. It's the third time I've been on his show now. And I thought this was a really good interview. Mike does a really good job of interviewing people. He's doing really good work over there. And we got into some really interesting topics, things like some of the pitfalls of this plant medicine work, some of the places where we felt it had been out of alignment. We spoke about things like principle, a lot of the events that are going on in our current world, and I think it was a really deep podcast where we touched on some really important points. So I hope you all enjoy this. He's, as I said, he's doing really good work over there. So if you enjoy this interview, also consider checking out his work. Again, it's Mikeadelic Podcast. You can find it on all the big channels, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. And yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. As always, if you are able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. For as little as $1 a month, you can sign up. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&A. So that's a really big help to me, to help me to continue to make these shows. To all the people who have done that, to all the patrons, thank you very much for your support. It's always really appreciated. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance. There's also the ability to direct donate via PayPal, and also with the YouTube channel now, you can join the channel, and that gives you a lot of the same perks as the Patreon page. If you're not able to do that, as always, if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, leaving comments in the comment section, sharing the video, that's always a really big help to get the show out to a bigger audience. And if you're listening to this, going on Apple Podcasts, leaving a starred rating and a short review, that's a really big help. Also with Spotify now, they're allowing you to rate the shows as well. So if you're listening on Spotify, that's something you can do as well. So I think that's it. Without further ado, here's my conversation that I did with Mike.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Yeah.
But anyway, here we are.
It's good to see you, brother. Got the long hair and beard going.
Yeah. I haven't cut it since like June of 2020, I think.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And you're coming from Colorado?
Yeah, I'm in Denver, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Where are you?
I'm back in the Sacred Valley. So I'm actually running a dieta right now. And I was, where was I? I was back at the temple for 2 months in November, December. And then I was back in the States seeing my family for Christmas. And then back here. And it's crazy, man. Peru is still going at it hardcore with the whole rules and regulations and all that. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. I mean, I've kind of been just out of principle boycotting any place that requires that, but Peru's getting pretty strict. I mean, to go into any indoor place, you have to present proof of if you're over 40 now, 3 vaccinations.
Wow.
And like I had to go to the immigration office the other day to like do this like little form or something, and to go in, you have to show proof of 3 vaccinations. So, I mean, basically, if you want to do anything here, if you want to be legal, if you want to participate in society, you got to be triple vaxxed.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. It's such a trip to see this going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially in whatever community we want to call what we're a part of, the plant medicine community, the conscious community, the psychedelic and theogenic community. It's really interesting to me to see that there isn't really a unity among people in our among our crew, or kind, so to speak.
Yeah.
That some people seem to really buy into the dominant narrative, which is just so interesting to me. Because I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, well, a lot of people here in the States have been fighting for psychedelic rights,
Right.
to change laws for decriminalization and stuff.
Cognitive liberty.
Cognitive liberty, the war on drugs, right? The war on drugs. So aren't we in another stage of the war on drugs where they're basically saying, if you want to participate, you have to take this one drug?
Yeah.
That's kind of what was coming to mind. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on all this from sort of a consciousness, cognitive liberty, and medicine approach or perspective?
I mean, it's very interesting. I remember a lady came down to the temple where we were working together, and she was giving out these stickers. And on the sticker, it had, I think, iboga, ayahuasca, maybe peyote, wachuma, something like that, and it said cognitive liberty. And the whole idea was that with so many of these plants, there's been this persecution, because people haven't had the freedom over their own autonomy of their own state of consciousness, their own state of mind. And I think this was an organization in Oakland, which has very much been in the forefront of a lot of that stuff. And like you were saying, it's such a fascinating dichotomy, because also a place like Oakland or San Francisco, California, is at the forefront of mandatory vaccination, forcing people to take a certain drug, not allowing people to have bodily autonomy. And I mean, it's a huge subject. I think we could talk about it from so many different angles, but for me, it was surprising on the one hand how many people, as you said, however you want to call this, the psychedelic community, the plant medicine community, the spiritual community, but how many people really went along with it, hook, line, and sinker. And so on the one hand, it was surprising because I think so many people, I think it's so easy for people. This is why I think principle is so important, is when you don't have principle, you're very easily swayed in the winds. So if you really believe in liberty, then you have to follow that all the way through. You can't just say cognitive liberty because that suits your own agenda. The idea is liberty. Now, certainly you can focus on cognitive liberty. If that's being impeded or impeded, you can say, hey, this is really important. Like, the idea is liberty. And if we don't have cognitive liberty, then we don't have liberty. But I think so many people, it's so easy to compartmentalize things. And so we say, yes, I believe in cognitive liberty because I've been being persecuted. I haven't been able to be free in that way. But when something else comes along, we jump on the bandwagon, and we don't stand on the principle of liberty. But I think it wasn't super surprising to me because it's a mentality I've seen a lot in the plant medicine world. And I think it's a huge part of plant medicine, which is really going inside and finding that personal power, which I think a lot of people also have a bit of an aversion to. And I think we can see that a lot in society, where we like to blame other people, we like to blame systems, we like to blame other countries. And a huge part of plant work, I think, is reclaiming that personal autonomy, that personal power. And that's very difficult. And I think very few people are really willing to do that, because seemingly it's much easier to not do that, to always have someone else be at fault. And it's a super common archetype that we see with plant medicine, is so many people come down, I'm unhappy, I'm suffering because of my father, because of my mother, because of my partner, because of society, because I wasn't given X, Y, and Z, or because this and this happened to me. And one of the major archetypes of plant medicine work is beginning to know thyself, to really see into that and see that it's a story. And sometimes that can be very triggering to people, because it's not that things didn't happen to us. I worked with people who, if I were to tell their stories, people would be in shock of what people have been through. Abuse of just almost like demonic proportions. And yet that doesn't mean that that person can't not be happy. It doesn't mean that that person can't be free. They can. But that it's a huge internal journey to be able to do that. And so with the pandemic, I think it's very hard, again, when people don't stand on principle, to be able to apply those same things widely. There was a beautiful samurai. His name was Musashi, and he said something like, when you understand the way, you see it broadly. You see it in all things. But if you don't understand the way, then you can't see it in all things, and everything begins to become compartmentalized. I support this, but I don't support this. I believe in this, and I don't believe in this. But there's not a through line. And if you have principle, even when really difficult situations arise, you can stand on the principle. If I truly believe in liberty, then I have to believe in that for everyone. If I believe in free speech, I have to believe that for everybody. And it's often, I remember a lot in plant work, for me, the thing that I saw that was the biggest hindrance to people was fear. And I think for me, fear is kind of the primordial emotion that leads to all of our suffering. And I think even in an archetypal way, it's a classic tale that's told in indigenous cultures and in traditions all around the world, is this primordial split from the Garden of Eden, from God into duality. The snake, which often represents wisdom, it's tempting us with the knowledge of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's this idea that from grace, we split into two, into man and woman, good and bad, right and wrong. And that's literally what makes the world made manifest. It is duality. But from duality becomes separation. There's a me and there's everything else. There's me that observes everything in the universe, and that's literally what the world made manifest means, is duality. There's two. But from that, there's this primordial fear, which is what happens if there's no me. And I think when people really begin to go deeply into plant medicine, that begins to come up. Is what does it mean when me begins to fall away, truly fall away? Like everything that I think is real, that's me, my name, my body, my form, my consciousness, this earth, the universe, what is up and down and left and right. And when all that begins to fall away, I don't care who you are, you're going to go into a state of primordial fear, because everything that we think is real is beginning to become disintegrated. And from that fear, I would say, like, all of the what we would call negative emotions arise, things like anger and lust and jealousy and covetousness and all of the things that cause us to suffer, negative belief systems. But it's all coming from that primordial place of fear. And so with the pandemic, I really was able to see, because a lot of people often also say, like, they don't have fear or they've overcome their fear. But I don't think that's true. And plant medicine really shows that. It will take you to places that are very, very challenging. And it will take you to a place that's going to push your limits, if you're willing to go there. And really, with the pandemic, I think what we saw was this primordial fear. People were afraid because there was something that was unknown, this unknown virus that potentially could kill us and kill our loved ones. And from that fear, it's very easy to, again, lose principle. And even a lot of people who say they believe in liberty or cognitive liberty, once that fear comes in that I'm going to die or my family's going to die, I'm willing to set aside that principle and go along with someone or something, some system that promises to protect me, that promises to keep me safe. And a lot of people judge that pact that they make to be more valuable. But the fascinating thing is that nothing we do, no pact that we make that goes against the fundamental principle will truly make us safe or happy or whole. It's only going to cause our eventual demise. And in Shipibo and the tradition we both know quite well, there's something very beautiful, and it really hit me when I learned that their word for good, which is hakun, on a deeper sense, it means truth. So that which is true is that which is good. Something that's good means it's true. And on a deeper
Mm.
level, it means that which is life giving. So it's the
Mm.
creative energy, that which supports life, that which gives life, ultimately is true. Therefore, it's good. That which divides, that which is going against life, is untrue. Therefore, it's not good.
Mm.
And that's where principle comes in, because principle is truth. Like, if freedom is a birthright, it's something that we're striving for, then it's true, and there's nothing that can come along that wavers that. And if it is, it means it's untrue. If it's going against that fundamental truth, then ultimately it means it's not true, which means it's bad. It means it's not life-giving. It's divisive. And I think the pandemic is a perfect example of what's divisive. I mean, parents locking their kids in a room, keeping them masked. Some lady kept her kid in a trunk because he had the virus. Friends who won't see each other, family members who won't see each other. I mean, that's the ultimate quality of divisiveness. It's dividing us. And anything that has that divisive quality is coming from a place of untruth. It's not life giving. It's continuing the separation, which in plant work is called the mareación, the dizziness. Like, we're all under this dizziness. It's almost like this spell. Even in plant medicine work, this idea of like brujeria comes in. We're under this spell, this witchcraft, this belief system, which is literally controlling our minds. And in North America, in some of the indigenous traditions, they call it wetiko. It's the spell of the mind that keeps us in separation. And it feeds off of power and fear and anger and lust and control. And that's what feeds it. And the antidote to that is truth, is freedom. But it's
Mm.
very difficult. And even a lot of people who've done this plant work, while they may have gone to a certain degree, I think, as can be seen, there's still a lot missing. And so, these plants also aren't they're not an inherent remedy, or they're not an inherent panacea. And I think a big part of that is because you can't remove the person. And I think a lot of us were under this illusion that, kind of this pharmacological point of view, whereas if I take this pill or I take this medicine, it's going to make me whole. And I don't need to do anything else. I don't necessarily need to be a good person. I don't need to have principle. I don't need to follow my heart. I don't need to stand up for what's right. This thing is just going to make me whole. And it doesn't. Like, you can't remove the person. You can't remove the volition. And that has been something that's also surprising to me in a way, is even doing this podcast, like the number of people who I've talked to who would be having these same conversations once the camera is turned on, or once the microphone comes on, a completely different mask comes down.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that is that same fear. I don't want people, I don't want to isolate people. I don't want people to not work with me. I don't want to be called a bad person, anti this and anti this. But even that, it's coming from that same place of fear. And
Yeah.
it takes someone who's really willing to have courage that's um, the archetype of Jesus, is believing in truth so much, being so righteous that I'm willing to die for humanity's sins. I'm willing to take that on. I'm willing to bear the cross. And everybody loves Jesus, but how many people are really willing to bear that cross? Very few. And
Right.
it's not a knock on people. It's much easier to not do that. Like, It's easier in life. It's easier to we're talking about even something like the vaccine, like, well, I'll just get the vaccine. It'll make life easier. I can go to the grocery store. I can do this. I can do this. It's much harder to not do that. And
Yeah.
so, but again, it comes back to principle. Do I truly believe in this? And if the answer is no, then we go along with the winds, and we do what we need to do. But if we truly believe in truth and in liberty, then at some point we have to take a stand. And I think that's another thing, is we want other people to take a stand for us.
Right.
And if you look
Yeah.
back through history at any movement that was revolutionary or stood on truth or principle, it started in the hands of very few people. And they were prosecuted, they were persecuted, but eventually, if the momentum became enough, more and more people felt that they kind of also had the right, or that those people gave them strength to also be able to stand up. And eventually, it becomes almost easy to then take that position because it's the majority position. Um, I think it is Arthur Schopenhauer has this beautiful quote, which is, all truth passes through three stages. In the beginning, it's laughed at, it's mocked. The second stage is it's violently opposed. And in the third stage is it's accepted as if it was always true.
Mm.
And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Like, if people really, really look deeply into that, so many things follow that pattern. First, they're laughed at. Like, who is this person? The Earth is round. Who are these idiots who believe the Earth? We know better. We're the authorities. We know what's true. What idiots? Like, let's laugh at them and mock them. Uh, but then, as the evidence starts to come in more and more and more, then you have to violently oppose them. You have to demonize them. You have to call them racist, anti-establishment, transphobic, anti this religion, anti this, anti God, because you have to demonize them. That's the way you fight. Is you other the other person. You other them. You make them less
Yeah.
than, and to the
Right.
point where
Yeah. You
maybe you even killed
dehumanize
them.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you dehumanize
Yeah.
them. And then
Yeah.
eventually, truth does win out, because it always wins out, because it is true. And then 10, 20, 100 years down the line, nobody remembers any of that. It's just, oh, yeah, that's true. We always knew that was true. That was never controversial. Of course. Of course the earth is round. Or of course the sun emits light, or, you know. and,
Right.
and we
Yeah.
we don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is so much there. There's a lot that I want to kind of jump on here. But one of the things that's coming to my mind is this, what you said pretty early on when you started talking about the aversion that you've noticed from people to really go there, to really go deeply into the fear, which requires a real, like, Christ-like surrendering, not in like a religious institutional context, but the man himself, like you said, bearing the cross, right? Because it's a representative of saying, I am a free, sovereign, independent human being. There is nothing you can do to me because I stand in these principles. Anything that you're doing to me, you're just doing to yourself. You're making it worse, right? So there's a sort of really deep understanding, I think, that you have to go into there and come around to some way to fully surrender, fully surrender. And I'm not quite sure if most people, as you were mentioning, really know how to do that. So I'm really interested to know a little bit more about how is it possible that people can do deep plant medicine work, uh, and get into, deep practices of altered states, and go within, but still have that control to compartmentalize, to not fully allow themselves to dismantle their identities, and to fully surrender into the fear. Because that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like that the egoic mind is still setting up borders and boundaries and compartments and rooms, even as people are diving deep, which I find to be very fascinating, because you were saying that we think that like, hey, we're going to drink this brew, we're going to take this medicine, it's going to crack us open, it's going to open us up, it's going to change us. However, we can't get rid of the person. We're still there. So there's still a human navigating and controlling the aspect of that experience if they don't have the ability to totally surrender to the experience. Is that something there? Like, is that what you're seeing?
I think often it really helps, especially with this kind of work, because it can be so ephemeral, ethereal. To use other examples, like this morning, but before we started this interview, I was doing jujitsu, and I was rolling with this girl, and she was saying like she was having panic attacks. Like if she got in a really bad position, she would have a panic attack. And I was like, yeah, that's super normal. Like if you're in a really uncomfortable position, that's normal. That's like a natural body response. And so how do you overcome that? Well, maybe you stay there for 2 seconds. Like you push yourself 2 seconds more and then you tap out. And then the next time it comes, you stay there for 5 seconds. And there's still going to be that same desire. After 1 second, you're going to want to tap out. But if you can stay 2, you've just doubled that time. And then the next time you stay 5 seconds, and the next time you stay 10 seconds, and then 20 seconds. And then maybe you find like that panic attack, that energy begins to dissipate. And then like days, weeks, months down the line, you find you're able to escape that position. And then you get a dominant position. And then the other person is in that, panic attack mode. And so like you were saying, with these plant medicines, they can also only take us as deep as we're ready to go. In that jujitsu analogy, if I was to like mount her and stay there for 1 minute, like she could be in real damage. Like she would start freaking out. And I've been in that position, I know it very well. She's not worse than me. I've been there. That's the only reason I kind of have some idea of navigating that space. So these plants aren't, in general, they're not going to take us to a place that's trying to do us harm. But hopefully they're going to take us to a place that begins to push our limits. At the same time, as we were saying, you can't remove the person. So do I really want to go there? And the answer for a lot of people is no. It's just a very clear no. And that's okay. Like for a lot of people, they don't want to do jiu-jitsu. That's okay. But if I truly have that deep down desire in myself to know myself, to answer these questions about what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to heal? What does it mean to truly understand this human existence? You're going to get pushed. And that's where that courage comes along is, am I willing to go back in there? Am I willing to go back in? Am I willing to be in a place that's uncomfortable? And that's a personal question that everyone has to answer. And sometimes it's a very slow process. That can definitely happen. Sometimes there can be these kind of revelational experiences where it does take us to some place and it just shatters everything. But even then, there's kind of this concept that I'm sure you've talked about, this idea of integration. Once I have this experience, once I see something that's maybe true or a deeper wisdom, am I able to integrate that? And that's a huge thing. And that's, again, like we were talking about principle. That's where principle comes in. Like maybe I see that I'm creating my own suffering, or I see that the person I was blaming for my suffering, I've also done similar things. And that may sound like a simple thing, but that's a huge revelation. Like the person I'm judging, I mean, that's another very Christian principle. Like it's easy to see the speck in my brother's eye, but not the log in my own. Like that's huge. If people can really integrate that, someone is free. You're actually free. That's your freedom. But we understand that on an intellectual level. We're like, oh yeah, I get that. One of the really fascinating things I find about facilitating is sometimes I'll say something like that, And the person's like, yeah, I know that.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. Yeah.
It's like,
And they're
well,
like, oh yeah. No, I know. Yeah.
and it's like, yes, you know, on an intellectual level, but that's why in Greek they had two words for knowledge. There was to know something on an intellectual level, and there was gnosis. And that was to truly know something, which means it's alive within us. And it's a much different knowledge from knowing something from the place of the mind. Again, that's the Christian archetype of Jesus with his heart on fire. That's gnosis. That's the burning fire. Nothing can penetrate that. It's an embodied knowledge. So, from that place, if someone says, you know, you're stupid because you're a white person, it doesn't phase. Or you're stupid because you're a black person. It doesn't phase because there's a deeper wisdom that knows that that's not true. It's divisive. So it's easy to know these things, but to truly embody them is very difficult. And for most people, it's going to be a gradual falling away. And so we begin to shed some of these layers. We begin to shed more. We begin to shed more. And for a lot of people at some point, they may be, okay, that's good. I'm good. Like, that's all I want to do. I'm at a place in my life and I'm happy. Maybe 10 years down the line, things change. Maybe on their deathbeds, things change. I would sense that we all have to answer these questions at some point in our life. For some of us, it may be on our deathbed. If we've ever been around someone who's dying, you can often see that. Some people die at peace. They've answered these questions, and some people there's a real struggle. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, I think it goes back to that idea that you can't separate the person, and we're all ready for different things. We all are looking for different things. And I think that's where it's a little disingenuous when we say something like, these plants are going to make you enlightened or something. They're not. They have that potentiality, but it's the same in anything. It's like jujitsu or playing the piano. Can the piano make beautiful music? 100%. The piano can make music that's divine, but you have to play it. And that's not easy. And that takes a tremendous amount of dedication, of skill, of practice, and really more than anything, a deep desire. Like, I want to find the divine through this piano. And if someone really does, they will. But how many people really find that? Very few. I mean, there's very few people who, when we listen to them play piano, we're moved in a way where time stops. And yet it can happen, but it's a rare individual too who's willing to go there. So, does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it brings up this conversation that I was having the other day with some people as we were serving hape to each other, and talking about our first experiences with rape or hape. I remember my first. What they were calling it, the people that I was speaking to, was a shamanic dose, because you have your little individual caripes, and then you have, I believe when Amika came to the temple, that was my first very large dose in sort of a ceremonial setting. And, it's a pretty entertaining story to tell now, just as I was looking at like everybody ahead of me just getting absolutely blasted by, this like foot long tepe and like a palm full of tobacco snuff, rabe, and the wheezing and the coughing and the breathing and the puking and the crying and the laying down on the back. So there's this element of like pain almost that comes with medicine, not necessarily with medication, though. And there's two differences there. And I think that the West, America specifically, is living in a medicated culture, not necessarily a medicine culture. We're a part of more of that medicine culture, but there's still this pain that this temporary suffering or pain that comes along with it. And I almost get a sense of a lot of people that go and travel to have plant medicine experiences. it's almost like I don't know. It's almost like saying like, "Oh, I did that once and I
Mm-hmm.
survived," kind of thing. But yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that because, tying that into the fear, how deep we're willing to go, and then, the pain that comes along with, or the displeasure that comes along with real medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's a common theme, and a lot of you use this word like shamanic dose, and a lot of these shamanic traditions, it's this idea that the shamanic path is a path of suffering, or also they use the word death, like it's a path of dying, and maybe dying many times. And I think to some that would seem kind of like sadomasochistic, like why would I want to suffer? But it's not that the path is inherently suffering, it's that it's taking us into our own suffering. It's very much this Buddhist point of view that to be a human entails suffering. But as the Buddha said, there's a way out of suffering. But the way out of suffering is almost inevitably we have to go into the suffering. We have to realize where that suffering is coming from. And like anything, by going into it, we begin to understand it. We begin to develop that gnosis, that experiential knowledge of what's happening. And and yes, like you said, there's many people like with rape where it's like this little like and they feel a little buzz and that's useful. Like that has its benefit, but it's also different from, as you said, like having a shamanic dose where it's inducing something very profound. And like I was thinking when you were talking about that, I had the same question when I was doing a really long period of dieting, and one of my main teachers, Ernesto, I was drinking a lot of tree barks mixed with tobacco, and the smell and the taste was so strong, and I would start feeling it in my body like 2 hours before he even came. I would just start to smell it. The smell would just start to permeate the air, and I would start to get nauseous. I would start to get like almost this nervous energy in me where I was like shaking and I was cold, and then I'd get really hot. And one day I asked him, I was like, Ernesto, like why, like, look, I love you. I appreciate what you're doing, but why does all of this medicine like taste and smell so bad? And he said, because it's preparing you. It's like, if you can overcome that, then when you're working in the shamanic realm, then you've overcome that in even just that act of overcoming the smell, overcoming the taste. It's like a prueba, it's a test, and it's preparing you for when even greater things begin to come in the shamanic realm. That by doing that, you're preparing yourself. And I mean, it kind of sounded nice, but then when I really started thinking about it, there's also this, because you're talking about like rape or tobacco near where you were in the Amazon. There's a group of people called the Witoto people, or the Bora people, and they're related to the Witoto, and they work a lot with ambil, with tobacco paste, also with coca, similar like to how Amika is working a bit. And they have like a leyenda, a legend, or a tale, and they say, and I could be getting this a little wrong. It's been a while, but I think the name of the creative energy is Buinaima, and they would say like Buinaima, he dreamt the world into creation, and that's very significant, because often when we think about dreams or the shamanic world, we often look at it in terms of as if it's not real. Like it's not this reality. This reality is what's real. And any other reality, my dream space or an altered state of consciousness, it's other than real. It's a hallucination. It's not real. But also any shamanic path would say that space is also real. it's also reality. And in a sense, it's even more real than this reality, because in this reality, we're bound. We're bound by time, we're bound by space, we're bound by certain laws. In that reality, there's infinite possibility. And I think that's to a large extent why these plants have such an ability to heal, is because they're not bound by some of these things that limit us. And in that space, there's true potentiality. And from the shamanic point of view, like this story that Buinaima dreamt this reality into existence, there's this shamanic idea that actually reality, the universe, started in the dream space, in the altered state. And from that, it manifested into this reality. So in a way, this reality is secondary. And also with the Borden, the Witoto, they say that one of the reasons we take tobacco is because tobacco allows us to dream like Buinaima dreamt this universe into creation. So that's very profound. And it's saying this medicine, tobacco, has the ability to allow us to dream this earth into creation, essentially to have the same dream that God dreamt, to have that same creative process. That's what creation is. And in Christianity, that's the creation myth. The Creator created this into existence from what? Doesn't really say, but from that shamanic point of view, is from the dream. He dreamt, he created this world into existence. So these medicines like tobacco, like you were saying at Ape, if given in the proper dose, in the proper set, the proper setting, also with the proper person. Like I spent some time with the Matses, and they also work a lot with Rape. They call it nuna. And they would say you only would receive the Rape, the nuna, from someone who has qualities that you want to take on, because you're going to be taking on their qualities, whether you want to or not. So choose very wisely who you allow to do that. And in the same idea of ayahuasca, like who is the healer? Who is the person singing their songs? Like, do they have gnosis? And in Shipibo, that's uni, knowledge. Do they have that knowledge? Are they a true unaya, one who works with uni, one who works with ayahuasca, one who has knowledge? Hopefully so, because you're going to be taking on part of them. Like there's a dance, there's a co-creative aspect when they're working with you. So with these medicines like tobacco, as you were saying, if given in the right way, it's taking us to that place where we're beginning to dream this reality into existence. Our reality, we're beginning to understand how to make that manifest. And that's no joke. That's, again, to a lot of people, that sounds really good until you also realize the responsibility that comes with that. Once you begin to realize the principles that one also has to follow, it's, if we cheat or we lie or we steal, and we know in a very deep way that that's against this life-giving force, it's not true, it's not good, then we also begin to feel that much more. And there's more consequences when we do that. And that responsibility becomes greater because there's this lived thing inside of us. And there's this felt sense that's ever more deep the more we begin to embody these things. And it becomes more and more difficult to go against that. And it's not to say we won't. We will make mistakes. We will fall down. But also they become more challenging. They become more difficult. And so I think to kind of answer that, it's difficult because as we begin to clear these things away, in a way, the responsibilities, the truth that we have to live by becomes more precise. It becomes more acute. And that's a big responsibility to take on. And almost no one is ready to fully take on that responsibility. As you were saying, to be Christ, almost nobody's ready to do that. But to whatever degree they are, it becomes more and more challenging. Because anything that's out of alignment of what that truth is, I now have to begin to like in Spanish they would say cargar. I have to begin to carry that, and that begins to be. It's only a weight when we don't, but if we do carry it, it's what sets us free.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, I was just about to ask that. I was like, what happens if you refuse that, right? Because I've heard, the refusal of the call, the refusal of the responsibility, creates a lot more suffering. Either way, there's going to be suffering, right? Like you're gonna have challenges and suffering, but wouldn't you rather them to be sort of more of an aligned, in tune suffering than a dismantling, terrifying kind of suffering? On the other way.
Yeah. Also, those challenges can get much more. Like the closer we get to what we're actually looking for, I think that in a way, the greater the challenges become.
Mm, mm.
It's like
The
if we
the
realize
tests.
the test, yeah.
Yeah.
Like if my test is I have to give up chocolate, okay, maybe that sucks. Maybe I really like chocolate, but it doesn't have that life and death quality to it. If the test is
Yeah.
I stand for freedom, that literally has a life and death quality. Like you can be killed for that.
Sure.
Just look throughout history. How many people have
Yeah.
been killed for standing for something they believe in? We're
Yeah.
not too far from that right now.
For sure. Well, yeah, and this goes into that fear. Because what does it really mean to be alive if you're not willing to really live for what matters? Who cares about death if yeah, it's very interesting to me. I mean, I like living. I like my life. I suppose if I was put in a position where I had to really fight for it, well, I'm not really quite sure what I would do, but I'd like to believe that I would fight for what's right and true. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting thing to sacrifice for something that seems just surface level and kind of shallow, like to sacrifice to continue going on, right? So the world that we're living in, a lot of us agree that it's not that great. Like people would like things to be better. However, they're in my opinion, a lot of people are sort of taking the quick and easy treats or the bait to just say, okay, just this will be fine for now. But it's never just fine for now. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, I mean,
And
I
that's the
know that
idea of principle, right? Is
yeah,
is this right? If the answer is no, I have to be willing to stand in that. Like, is
right.
discrimination
And what,
okay? And that's a really legitimate question. Like, I think a lot of people, their inherent response to that is no. But I don't know that a lot of people have really thought deeply on that. Like, is it okay to discriminate? I think you can make a very good case that the answer is yes. We all discriminate all the
sure.
time. Stores discriminate, restaurants discriminate. You can't wear, if it's a really nice restaurant, you can't wear shorts. They're discriminating. Is that okay? It's a difficult question. You can take that either way. We discriminate based
Yeah.
on age. Can you drink alcohol at 5 years old? We say no. Why? Because we're discriminating. We're saying no. We as a society say you need to be at least 18 or 21, whatever it is, to be able to drink. We're discriminating based on age. Even in the pandemic, that was a really common question in the beginning, was if there was a shortage of ventilators, who gets them? Well, you have to discriminate. You have to come up with some criteria that you're going to begin to discriminate on people with. But
People don't like that word, though.
they don't like the
right?
word.
Discriminate.
Right.
They don't like that word. Yeah.
Right.
But you're
But
right.
I think, because we don't like that word, because we also inherently realize that there is something wrong with that. Like that on a fundamental level, there's something not good. Like if we're discriminating in a way that it's coming from that place that's, again, going back to that Shipibo idea of truth. Is it divisive? If we're discriminating and it's an act of union or it's serving, then it's good. But if it's discriminatory and it's divisive, it's hurting someone. And I think, and that's what we usually think of when we think of that idea of discrimination. There's some pain that's generated. We're hurting someone. We're removing someone. And so I think most of us, that guttural reaction of no, that's not good is true. It's coming from a good place. Like, that's not right. But as we've seen, the pandemic is a great example. We're very willing to discriminate on people. Very, very willing to. And a lot of the people who are willing to discriminate, if you ask them if discrimination is okay, they would very, very quickly say no. But again, it's because they're not really standing on a strong principle. Is this right?
Right.
And again, if the answer is no, then if you don't stand by that, in a shamanic sense, we would say we lose our internal power. We have no power left.
Sure. Yeah.
And even from a shamanic point of view, they would say, like, that's where brujeria is able to penetrate us. If we're in integrity, if we're standing on principle, to be in integrity means to be whole. So if we're whole, that there's no area for, brujeria, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it, bad thoughts, bad energy. We're whole. But very few of us are truly whole. We all have our kind of Achilles heels. We all have our blind spots. We all have our beliefs. We all have these things. And that's where, kind of going back to the other question, like, it's very difficult to really stand in that principle, to be ridiculed, to be laughed at, to be, from the Schopenhauer quote, to be violently opposed, standing on principle. It's much easier to let that go. But as you were saying, ultimately that is going to cause us a greater suffering, but it just may not be as apparent in the short term.
Right. Yeah, this is what I'm getting at, is like the mortgaging or the sacrificing of the depths of what life has to offer when we stand in integrity, when we allow, ourselves to surrender to true freedom within ourselves, and then have that ripple outward. Because what it seems like is that what most of human civilization seems to have done is like say, okay, well, we don't want this to continue, so we'll just do we'll compromise, we'll make concessions. But why is it why is that worth it? Why do you want to live in a world of concessions and consolation prizes? That's the thing that I don't really fully get. It's very hard for me to wrap my head around that. But I mean, I guess it comes all back to fear. Right. I mean, like, when put with a test like this, the pandemic has been a test, right? It's a huge test. Like, who is willing to stand up in truth, freedom, liberty, peace, acceptance for right? Like, hey, accept me for my choices, my body as a sovereign being. And, it seems like we're just most people are willing to just compromise and make concessions in order to keep going in the less satisfying, less gratifying, and less truthful world.
Yeah,
that's my perspective on it. Yeah,
and I think to a degree, like, we're all looking for safety, and that's where all of these things, again, from this more like shamanic point of view, all things have a light and a dark to them. Like, I think that's true. That may not be true, but in that world of like form, even when we say like everything, like etymologically, it's everything, which means anything, any physical thing. That's what makes up the universe. So everything, in a way, has its light and its dark. And I think on an even deeper level, it comes back more to like the way in which something is used. So like we were talking about tobacco or ayahuasca, a lot of people consider these as like dark things, like black magic. I mean, here in Peru, people were persecuted. They were murdered for working with ayahuasca or tobacco. They were considered witches and sorcerers, and they were killed. Can those plants be worked with in bad ways? Also, yes. I mean, probably everyone has heard a story now of someone who goes to a shaman somewhere and they get sexually abused, or they, that's also reality. But is that the ayahuasca, or is that the person, or the manner in which it's being used? And I think in that fundamental level, when you look at it from more of this kind of, again, shamanic or spiritual way, everything in itself is neutral, but inherently it's one. Everything is one. Everything is from God. So, but in the duality, everything has its light and its dark. It has its good and its bad. Ayahuasca can be used to heal. It can also be used to manipulate. People get in very, very open and vulnerable states when they drink ayahuasca. So what's being fed to them? Are they being fed positive things, affirmations? You can do this. Like, I got your back. You're going to get through this. Like, you're good. Or, oh my God, you're dying. We have to get the paramedics. Or, hey, you're really beautiful. Like, hey, maybe we should, I really feel connected to you. And I think there's something, it's, one is very vulnerable in that state. So, with all of these things, there's anything can be used for good and anything can be used for bad. And I kind of lost my train of thought, but you were talking about the
Yeah. Well. Let's talk about this for a second. So, what you're saying is, like, essentially, it's reminding me of the discrimination against, like, early on in the pandemic when people were talking about alternative options. So this is one of the things that has come to me. So the point here is that we want these quick solutions, and we're willing to sacrifice,
right.
the deeper truth, right? So if you have something that's come back to you on that, like, please take it away.
Yeah. Well, also along those lines, it's the kind of that idea of sacrificing something short term for long term gain. And again, that's really tricky, because that's also, like, that's what investing is. Like, I'm going to sacrifice something on the short term for long term gain. Like, instead of going and blowing all my money, I'm going to put it in the bank, and that's a sacrifice. And the idea is that in the long term, I'll come out better for that. And so I think that's what, a lot of people think. Like, I think, again, that mentality is coming from a good place. Well, we'll make a short-term sacrifice and it's going to have a long-term positive gain. But that's where, again, principle comes in. Like, what am I sacrificing? And am I sacrificing from my own volition, or am I being forced to do something? Like, that for me is a really big key. Even in some of, like, our other podcasts, kind of talking about, like, libertarianism, that's a big fundamental key, is it's voluntary. Once you begin to use force or coercion, even if it's for the so-called greater good, and almost every mass atrocity in the history of the world has been in the name of a greater good,
right?
Then you've gone away from that principle. You've gone away from the principle of life-giving. Once you start to dominate someone, coerce them, use power to force them to do something, well, there is no long-term gain anymore. Because in the short term, you've gone against principle. You're doing something that's bad. So anything that's going to come from that ultimately is imbued with that same energy.
Yeah.
And so, but that's where that's where it's tricky, is, like, we all want to be good people. We want to help out. And I think in a way, the pandemic was a very beautiful manifestation of that. Like, people were like, okay, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I'm going to do my part. Let's do it. Even people who, like, live day by day, like, even 2 weeks is difficult, man. Like, that's, if you're making 30 soles a day, like here in Peru, when you go to fill up at the gas station, you put in 5 soles because that's all you have. You don't fill up the tank because you don't have 30 soles to fill up the tank. You have 5. And then you go work and you get another 5 and you fill it up, or you get 6 and you keep 1 for food. So to go 2 weeks, that's a sacrifice. But I think that also in a way showed like the beauty of humanity, that, yeah, we're willing to do this, like for the greater good, we're willing to do this. But
yeah, definitely.
That's where these things get so nuanced too, and I think, when one begins to think about these things, I think especially like libertarianism does a really good job of like just making us think about things from a different angle. Like
Sure.
there's a Johns Hopkins report that was recently published that showed lockdowns had like an almost negligible positive net gain, something like 0.2% or something. And like what a lot of the researchers pointed out is something, for example, I mean, you see this in Peru. Like Peru had one, if not the most strict lockdown in the world, but definitely one of the more strict lockdowns, and also the highest death rate.
Right.
Now, is that just correlation, or is there direct causation there? Most likely it was a direct causation. Why? Well, as most people know now, the virus doesn't transmit very well outside. It doesn't transmit in fresh air. It doesn't transmit in sunlight. Most Peruvian houses have no air circulation, almost no natural sunlight. So all of a sudden you lock people down for 2 weeks in this enclosed environment, and a lot of people end up getting sick. And also, like what the researchers were saying, which is just kind of human nature. Like if you tell people you can't go outside and go to a beach, well, they're still doing their part. They're staying inside, but they're still human. So they're still going to congregate. They're still going to meet up. And so now you have all these people meeting up in enclosed spaces,
Yeah.
which ends up being worse. So, even with the good intentions,
Way worse, right?
Like what is the real cost of that? And I think that's where the difference is between force and being like voluntary action. You can tell people like, hey, this is what we think. This is coming from the experts. This is what we think. But this is what we recommend. And ultimately, you're a free human being. And the choice has to be yours. And once it's not yours, well, then I think, as someone pointed out, like, what is the difference between that and house arrest? Most of us would
Right.
say house
Yeah.
arrest
Well,
is not good. And yet
right.
somehow we
Right.
said it is good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, really, we're under the spell. This is brujeria. This is the manipulation of, you can draw the comparison here between the so-called, powers that be, who are making the decisions, the people that are feeding the engine that keeps the status quo incentive system going, and with the control and the power, are like the manipulative shamans that are casting spells over people and saying, no, this is the way it's going to be. Do this, don't do that. Very manipulative, because people are in a trance, right? Like we were hit with a shock and awe event. People got very fearful and basically said, yeah, tell us what to do. What do we do? But there's that natural instinct of the human being. They're gonna congregate with people. Everybody. I don't know anybody that's followed the rules and the mandates and all that kind of stuff to a T. I'm sure there's people out there that have, but I personally don't. There's people that make concessions. They're like, well, we got to get together with people. Because that's that energy, like you were saying, of life, of creation that wants to keep going. You can't keep that down, right? And we're seeing that now with the trucker rally in Canada, all over the world. People are fed up. And yeah, I mean,
And that's a very good example, because like most shamans who do bad things, most of them are not, I think, actively trying to. Like, I think most of them still, to some degree, have good intentions, but they haven't done the work deeply enough themselves to realize what all of the consequences of their actions are.
Right.
And I think that's,
because the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly how you put it. I remember thinking in the beginning of the pandemic, like, why are we only listening to epidemiologists? Like, for sure, they have a valid field. It's super important. Their voice is super important. But the world isn't epidemiological. It consists of economies and psychology and other diseases and human nature and just infinite different things. And if that's all you're focused on, you don't realize what all those unintended consequences are. And as you said,
Mm-hmm.
when people are under that spell, they want to listen to one person who's going to be their savior. But then you lose all of the other things. And just like that shaman who's most likely trying to help, but he's under his own spells. He's under his own spells of power. He hasn't done the work. So he gives someone a dose because he thinks this is the right dose, and the person ends up freaking out, and then they end up in a worse place than to begin with. And he's like, but I was trying to do good.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
he doesn't have that gnosis. He doesn't have that deeper understanding. And yeah.
Yeah, and even like with some of the maybe I don't know what I would just beliefs, I guess, maybe some dogmatic beliefs, right? Like some ayahuasqueros will say, stay away from cannabis because it's a very, seductive and controlling kind of plant. We don't want that energy. Some would say, hey, that's fine. All plants are welcome here. There's different views in different areas, which reminds me, again, I can't help relating this back from like sort of the micro individual healer aspect or communal ceremonial aspect to the macro, like big societal civilizational aspect, which is, the discrimination and oppression and suppression of other options for healing. Right? It's like the maybe dogmatic belief, maybe nefarious intentions, maybe driven by profit, probably most likely. But I'm thinking of Dr. Emmanuel, I think was Stella Emmanuel, like early on in the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, was working with an African-born doctor, and so there's like a little bit of probably racism in there as well, of just like, well, no, she's using these like voodoo techniques, and this is like witchcraft. This isn't real medicine. We've got science. We've got so and then with ivermectin, like, why not just let everybody just make the why not, if we lived in a world, right? I mean, I know you and I are on the same page with this, but it's just for the listeners there, it's just like a thought experiment. If we really lived in a world where people wanted to help us, wouldn't they say, hey, we're in this pandemic, there's this virus, we don't know what it is, we're going to explore all options, everything's on the table, we're going to explore everything, and yeah, try it, see what works for you.
Well, that's right. And that's, again, where it comes back to principle. Like, we all talk about things like diversity and, but
Yeah,
then when it comes to it,
inclusion, right?
inclusion,
Yeah.
we don't believe that. Then we want it one
Mm-hmm.
way, and it's my way or no way. And if you don't do it my way, I'm going to demonize you. I'm going to throw you in jail. You're excommunicated from society. So it's not diverse at all. It's the opposite of diversity. It's singularity. And it also goes back to this idea of shamanism or holistic medicine, health, even Western medicine. Two people come into the doctor does not give them the same medicine. Why? Because they're two different human beings. They have completely
Yeah.
different problems. They have completely different life situations. They're different age, different weight, different diets. So there's not a panacea remedy that you give to everyone that's going to cure everyone. It just doesn't exist. It's literally fun. Like, it's the most basic concept of medicine, that you have to look at the person in a holistic manner. And that goes for everything from families to societies to communities to countries, even in terms of countries, very different. Like, how are the people living? What are they like? What is their health like? How much sunshine are they getting? What are their living situations like? Are they able to, everyone in the beginning, and again, kind of like you said, there is this a bit like elitism, or I don't want to say racism, but this view that like, if I can do something, everyone can do it. If I can work for home for 2 weeks, then everyone should be able to do that. I'm making the sacrifice, therefore everyone should. Yeah, but most people don't, like, a lot of people in the world don't have a computer. A lot of people in the world can't
Mm-hmm.
work from home. They can't order their
Right.
groceries, then disinfect them. And, so are you, is your principle you really want to help people? And if the
Mm.
answer is yes, then there's something that's out of alignment there.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's self-preservation, right? And rationalization, self-preservation. Hey, I'm doing my part, but really, I really question how many people really truly care about other people, and how many people really want to be seen as the noble, virtuous, moral ones,
For
right?
sure.
Because
For
it's
sure.
easier. It's easy to be seen that way now online in the digital space. Go take a selfie at a hospital, and when you're wearing a mask, maybe you're dropping off some snacks or something for the workers. Hey, I'm doing my part. Like, I'm contributing. But what are you really doing it for? I don't know. I'm making this scenario up, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, that I think that by the nature of the medium that is of our time, a lot of people are sort of maybe unconsciously pulled towards showcasing
Mhm.
virtue and stuff. And we've talked
Yeah.
about this before. Um, but yeah, what's something that's really sort of, on the top of your mind around this topic right now, or maybe at the top of your heart, like something that you're really feeling um, around the sort of global situation right now?
Well, kind of going back to your last point, I mean, that's also a very big thing of plant work, or I don't necessarily like the word spirituality, but for lack of a better word, is,
Yeah, we need new words.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, there is something about being virtuous in that way. And also where that becomes very difficult is part of that fear we were talking about is when I believe I'm virtuous, when I believe what I'm doing is right, then when someone comes along and does something else, it's not just that they're doing something else for them, it's that it's perceived as a direct attack on me. Because who I identify with is my virtuosity. It's my beliefs. And if someone comes along and has a different belief system, whether we realize it or not, it's taken as a direct attack on us, because all of a sudden
Right.
it calls into question, is my belief system true? And if it gets threatened, often people will use like the idea of the ego with that. If the ego gets threatened by someone else having a different belief system, sometimes a radically different belief system, the ego's natural response is to fight, to destroy, to kill that other belief system, because now my ego is king again. There's no more threats. It's just me. And so there's something in that act of being virtuous, which when something comes along and threatens that, it has to fight. It has to demonize. It has to belittle the other, because that's the nature of the ego. Is it in order to survive, the ego has to be right. And if it's not,
Yeah.
then the fear begins to arise. Well, who am I? Well, what is real? Well, what is right? And it's much easier, again, to demonize the other person, if we take it to an extreme scale, to kill the person, than to really go inside and begin to allow that ego to begin to fall away. Because that's really scary.
Mm.
That's really scary. Because it's kind of like opening up Pandora's box. Well, if I'm not right about this, then what else am I not right about? If I've been overlooking this, what else in my life have I been overlooking? And all of a sudden, the pillars begin to fall away. And then we're left, people say they want to be egoless, but almost nobody really does,
Mm.
because it's terrifying. I don't even know what's up and down. I don't know what's left and right. And the antidote to that is it's kind of a dirty word now, but it's faith or trust. Like, if we can really trust in the universe, then also we're free. But that's very difficult
Mm.
to truly trust in life. Um,
Trust in the universe within.
yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine you titled your podcast that for a particular reason. I'm curious to know a little bit about that, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on a common sort of topic that gets tossed around, which is this concept of ego death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the universe within it was actually an ode to one of my first teachers. He was a guy named Dr. David Jubb. Really, really fascinating human being. But he had a little show called The Universe with it. No, it was The Universe Inside Your Mind. So originally I wanted to call it that, but I didn't want to steal his name. So I thought, well, what's the essence of that? Also with plant work, and so I came up with The Universe Within. Um, but it's essentially that this kind of thing that you hear in all sorts of traditions about this idea of going within, that if we really want to change the world, we have to change ourselves. Like there's not a separation. I mean, again, that's a very common spiritual idea that we kind of think we understand on an intellectual level. But if we really begin to embody that, that means what's good for me is good for the universe. What's good for the universe is good for me, that there's not a separation. And that's a very radical way of thinking. Um,
Yeah, one would say
like,
that's a kind of a communal way of thinking.
yeah. You know, even a really
Community.
common example, like if I'm eating apples that grow here, that's probably going to be good for me. Why? Because they're local. They're growing in
Yeah.
the season. They're from here. There's no real cost. The cost is me taking 5 steps to the tree and pulling it down. I eat it. I give it back, rather than me eating um, caviar that's
Oranges
imported
from
from
Florida.
Russia. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right.
You know
Yeah.
that it's probably not going to be giving me on a nourishment level what I need in this climate right here, right now. And there's a tremendous cost to that. There's a tremendous cost of bringing that to here. So those things,
Right.
they're not different. Like what's good for me is also good for the world. What's good for the world is also good for me. Um, so yeah, but anyway, that's where the universe within came. Was your second part of the question?
Let's stick on this actually, because what's coming to mind now is the emphasis and the importance
Ego
of
death. Yeah.
healing with. Yeah, but the yeah, we can get into that, but I want to kind of like touch on a little bit of like how healing happens by really tapping into your local environment and with people that, because I think there's this idea, yeah, and this even ties into ego death, like, oh, I killed my ego, and I did 10 grams of mushrooms in my room alone, and but there's an essence of community, like we have to be tapped into our environment and the people around us to some degree to really fully receive that what you're saying, what's good for me is good for the environment, good for the community, good for the universe, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe there's something there in terms of like that there is this deep in like we're deciphering between individual going within and healing, yes, 100%, but that doesn't mean that you're isolated
Mm-hmm.
from the world and your environment, right?
That's a super important point, and I think that's where I see a lot of confusion, and it goes in terms of political, like is the individual king or is the community king? Shouldn't we have socialism because we're focusing on the greater good? And I think, just as you said, I think for me that's where the fundamental confusion comes in, is this idea that those are somehow separate, that by sacrificing myself, the greater good will be greater. Well, it won't, because I'm sacrificing myself. It goes back to that idea of like using force. Once I go against nature, once I have to harm myself or uh, not be happy and say, well, if I'm not happy, then the greater good is going to be happy. No, they're not, because that's just one more unhappy person in the greater good. I'm
Mm.
coming from that energy. That's all I'm now relating to everyone around me. So what happens? Well, unhappiness spreads. Why? Because I'm unhappy. If I'm happy, then the greater good will be happy. If nothing else, even if I was a hermit in the middle of nowhere, well, that's one more happy person in the greater good. And yes, most of us don't live as hermits. So that happiness begins to spread, and it has a tangible effect, and it begins to spread, and it actually begins to create the greater good. So
Mm.
I think a lot of people look at like, well, if you just let individuals run wild, then the world would just be burning and everything. Well, no, because then if the world was burning, we wouldn't be happy. Like we'd be all suffering. So it's it has to start within. Even in like where you were at the temple, like, as you remember, the way that someone learns from plants is to go into a dieta. It's not a communal
Right.
practice. You're in isolation. And the only place you have to start from is you. That's it. And from that place, one can begin to come into wholeness, to come into integrity. To heal means to be whole. So if someone is truly healed, if they're truly whole, then again, that's the energy they're emitting. And every action is coming from a place of healing because they're whole. So every action they take is a healing action. And so how does that affect the collective? Well, it's healing to the collective. And then that affects someone else and they're operating from that energy of healing. So in a way you could say, yes, it's selfish because I have to start with me, but it's not selfish because it's ultimately serving the whole. When we serve ourselves, when we come into wholeness, when we come into harmony, that directly affects the whole. So I think that's where a lot of like the confusion comes in, because it's again seeing things as separate parts, like that these two entities are antithetical to each other. Like the individual and the community can't exist in harmony. Like one has to sacrifice for the other. If we want the individuals to be strong, there's no community. If we want the community to be strong, there can't be any individual rights. And that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense on a mathematical level. It doesn't make sense on an energetic level. And it doesn't make sense on the level of spirit. If this idea is everything is one, then what's truly good, again, going back to that Shipibo idea, what's truly good is life-giving. It's life-giving for myself. It's life-giving for life. It's life-giving for the community. It's life-giving. It's life-giving for everything. Um, in
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the ego death, it's a big subject, and I think a lot of that is also ideas that we have about that my ego is bad and I have to kill it. Um, I think the easiest way, without getting too much into it, is the voice that's saying I have to get rid of my ego is my ego. So
Yeah.
by getting rid of my ego, I'm just enhancing my ego.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, again, I don't think it's about getting rid of something. It's about coming into balance. It's about being whole.
Yeah.
It's about being in
Mm.
integrity. And 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 that's kind of the paradox, and none of it is ever going to quite make sense in terms of words or language, because words and language are also in the realm of duality. No words are ever going to no words are going to give you God or the oneness experience, because they can't, because we all exist in the world of form. That's why the greatest books, the greatest poetry, we have a deep felt sense of something, but it's not going to take us there. It's like it's trying to point us there. And the really beautiful works can give us a glimpse of that, but it's not absolute. If it was, we would all have some book and we would read it and we'd all be God or enlightened, however we want to. We'd have no ego, no unhealthy ego. So in this reality, like the ego is necessary. Like we need to know that there's a me and there's a someone else. If I want to go to the city, there's a me and there's my motorcycle I'm going to get on. If there's no motorcycle, it wouldn't function. If there's no gravity,
Right.
it wouldn't function. If there's no accelerative force, it wouldn't. Nothing works. Like we need all of that duality. Um,
Yeah.
but often maybe another way of relating it, often in like more shamanic terms, you'll often hear the Shipibo use this word. It's a Spanish word, but they say dominar, which I guess literally would translate to dominate, but probably a better word is to master. So often our ego is dominating us. It's ruling us. It's out of balance to the point where we're not able to see clearly. That's what vipassana means, like to see things as they actually are. It's one of the qualities of tobacco that people often relate, is it allows me to see things as they actually are. From a Christian perspective, it's the word apocalypse. I think it's
Right.
something that's been
Yeah,
really
the lifting of the veil.
really misunderstood,
Yeah.
that the apocalypse is the end of time. Well, it is, but in a good way, not in a bad way, like we're all going to die. It's the end of time because it's the end of the illusion. It is our death, but it's the death of everything that's not serving us. It's lifting the veil so that we can see things as they actually are, rather than through all of the veils, through all of the masks, through all of the ego patterns and belief systems and things we've been raised through society. So the apocalypse is beautiful. It's what we're all looking for. That's why the apocalypse is always in the future.
Yeah.
It actually only exists now, but since we're not able to see things as they actually are, we think that the apocalypse is coming in the future. There's something I have to do before I can actually see things as they actually are. From kind of the misaligned point of view, again, the apocalypse is going to come at some point, and then we're all going to die. As in, like the end of the world. No, it's the end of the illusion. But
right.
So that ego death, I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but there are people who would use that phrase when they go into a very profound, often plant medicine process, working with one of the very strong plants, maybe called master plants, ayahuasca, wachuma, peyote, tobacco, iboga. These plants can induce an experience that people feel like they have died. But they would say it's an ego death because their body is, they emerge from that experience. Their body is still there. But often in that experience, everything they think they knew, or everything that they think they are, dissolves. And that's why it's often called like a heroic journey, or the hero's journey, is because it's literally, you're going on the journey of your life. You're traveling to the foreign lands and encountering things that you never could have dreamed of, and being tossed into these tornadoes and tsunamis and having to overcome them, and eventually going into the cave and having to slay the dragon. And that's a really beautiful archetype as well. Like the word for dragon, it comes from serpent. The dragon is the winged serpent, and it's an archetype you see all over the world. And the serpent, etymologically, it means light, and it means the light that's reflected back. And so even that's like the story of my name's Jason. That's the story of Jason and the Argonauts, or like the story.
You just froze for a second.
Oh, sorry.
I think you're coming back on. There you go. But the story of
and like the story of Medusa going into the cave, facing, often it can be this feminine energy of these serpents, and the only way to overcome that was to hold a mirror to her own face, and the light reflected back is what turned her into stone. And so it's that same archetype, that ultimately it's not slaying the serpent, it's not slaying the dragon, it's knowing thyself. It's ultimately going into the darkness, holding the mirror up to our own face, and seeing that who we thought we were, we're not. And that's the ultimate enlightenment. That's the slaying of the dragon. And in that ego death experience, now, those are just like archetypal examples. Everyone's experience is going to be completely different, completely unique, but maybe having some of these themes of extreme challenge, extreme journeying, and reaching a point where one begins to dissolve. And often that can be a very scary process, but one is left with a sense of freedom, liberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But almost always it's temporary, because it has to be, in a way, because we come back to what we call this reality, and that duality begins to take form again. I look and I see, wow, like there's a body here. And then I look
Yeah.
around and I see light. And then I remember, maybe someone asks me, like, who are you? And I can't answer because there is no me still. That concept doesn't exist. But then slowly I begin to say, oh yeah, I'm Jason, and I'm a man, and this is where I am. And Jason is hungry, and Jason loves you, or Jason thanks you. And then it's not Jason. The word is me or I. Oh yeah. Well, it seems kind of strange to come back to that, but then it's like the game again. Oh yeah, I am me. So I am thirsty. I am hungry. And then we come back to this reality and everything that entails. But very often people are left, there's a resonance of that, almost like a gnosis, a knowing of something that happened that they can't shake. And it's not to
Right.
say they're never going to be unhappy again or they're enlightened, but there's some resonant effect where they can draw on that, and it gives them a different perspective. It shows them that there was something beyond what they thought was ultimate reality, and that there was something beyond that was incomprehensible, beyond the mind, beyond their imagination. And that's why people often refer to it as, they say something like, I experienced God, or I died and I was reborn. It was something so profound where it shattered the egoic illusion of what they thought was real.
Oh, hold on a second. You dropped off with something so profound. You're back.
Yeah. This idea that it was something so profound that it shattered their sense of what was real. And they often experience something like, I experienced God, or I died and I was reborn. And that experience stays with them. And it's something that they can't really shake off. Some people may feel called to go back to that in the future. Some people maybe not. That's what they need, and that kind of brings them peace. There was you're probably familiar with the study at Johns Hopkins. Are you still there, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I can hear you. There was that study at Johns Hopkins where they worked with terminally ill patients on their deathbed. And I forget the percentage, but I think it was a majority of people, maybe 6 out of 10 or something. And after that experience of working with psilocybin, and these were people who knew they were going to die. They had a lot of fear around that, not just fear for themselves, but fear that they were going to lose their loved ones. Their loved ones would suffer after they died. A large number of people after that experience kind of relayed something similar, where they feel like they saw, some people would say something like they saw the light, or they died and they came back, and that fear, that tightness, that rigidity around what was laying ahead of them dissolved, and they felt at peace. They felt okay with what was going to come.
Yeah. I remember that study. I think it was like 86% or something. I think it was a pretty high percentage. But okay, this gets me to like the apocalypse, the lifting of the veil, the ego death, truth, reality as it is, seeing it as it is. This is ultimate truth. Yes. Like this is what, you hear a lot of people say, like, well, my truth or my experience or my thing, but there is sort of, there's a one common thread that really points to this felt direct experience that a lot of us have had. and the gnosis that comes along with that. The Would you say that this is like the one truth?
Yeah, that's a big question. The video is paused. I don't know. Are you able to see me? You're kind of
Yeah,
frozen.
I can see you. I think it will. We'll see what happens after when I stop it. It might just like be scrambled for now and then come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a big question. I think for most of humanity, people would have acknowledged that there was truth, and truth kind of in this idea of a capital T. I think this idea that there's not truth is a much more modern phenomena, almost this like postmodern thing of there is no truth. And I think in a way, I think ultimately there is truth. But I think it goes back to that idea that we were kind of saying of these, even like these plants, this idea that they're neither good, they can be used for both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to me seems like a good example. Are they good or are they bad? I think in an ultimate sense, in an ultimate truth, if we're talking about that, they're good. Why? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
life giving. They can heal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that they're absolutely good. They also have bad to it. And I think that's the point where you can say, like in an ultimate sense, nothing is either good or bad. Nothing is like 100% true or 100% untrue. The fact that there is a day means there's a night. So again, in this realm of duality, there's always this true and untrue, and nothing 100% embodies that. But I think, as you were saying, this idea of truth is something that's deeper, and I really like the way the Shipibo put it, which is it's that which is true is that which is life giving, and it's
Yeah.
this idea of like union, that which is moving us towards union, towards harmony, towards peace. Often these words are used along with that idea of like ultimate truth or God. Those in a sense embody that inherent truth, and the things that don't, in an ultimate sense, they're not true. They still exist. That's where, like, a lot of this is also a cosmovision, and it's a word that I
Right.
think a lot of us don't really think much of it. Kind of like you were mentioning, we if most of us hear that word cosmovision, they would picture like primitive people in the jungle, and oh well, they have a cosmovision. But I just see the world as it really is. I'm science based, or I know these things as fact. But everyone has a cosmovision, and it can be really difficult, very difficult, to see outside that cosmovision. And so even like that tale of like, I'll often use this example, like in English, we use these words, like we'll tell a kid, you're just dreaming, like that, like, hey, I want to be an astronaut. No, you're just dreaming. That's never going to happen. Like, we use that word as if it's not real. But again, that comes from our cosmovision. From a different cosmovision, they would consider the dream space real. And again, maybe even more real. And even from a very logical point of view, whoever Jason is, me sitting here talking to Mike, there's some awareness. I can look and I can say, this is my body, this is my hand, but it's still me, whatever that is, saying, this is mine. There's some awareness that's able to look around and differentiate myself. In that dream space, it's exactly the same. I may be able to see my body. I may not be my body. I may be a woman. I may be a bird soaring over and looking at the canopy. I may be a child. I may be an old person. I may be floating through space. But the me that's doing that is the same me that's here. Like, nothing has changed. And just because maybe someone else isn't seeing the same thing in that moment. In this reality, like I'm looking at this computer and you're looking at the computer, and we can say, okay, well, that's a computer because we both see it. But when I'm dreaming, I'm seeing something and maybe no one else is. But even that's a cosmovision,
Mm-hmm.
because we often think our dreams are isolated. And again, from a shamanic point of view, and people have experienced this in ayahuasca ceremonies or other plant medicine ceremonies, that they also have a connection in that space to other people. Other people may relay the same experience. A big part of shamanic work is working in that space. And I mean, this may sound crazy to people, but then it actually affects what we would call reality. Much like that Bor Witoto creation myth, that by affecting it in that level, that in this reality it's also affected. That level, if anything, even precedes this reality. So I think, going back to that idea of truth, in a way, you can never really answer that. Like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
if we say this is true, can the opposite also be true? Almost likely, yes, because there's always this duality. But I think when people are talking about something like truth or God, they're talking about something primordial, something that unifies, something that's beyond duality, which we can say that is truth, and that there's nothing
Mm-hmm.
outside of that. There's no opposite of that. There's no it's not true, because it's so true that it encompasses everything, and it's life giving, which again may sound like a silly thing, but it's no
I love
coincidence
that.
that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in all religions, in all spiritual traditions, there's a creation myth. The
Yeah.
origin is creation. It's life giving. It's birthing. That the essence of life is to create, and we all have that creative power within us. Well, most of us, and so yeah, that idea of truth, I think, is something real. Um, and that's where I think this idea of gnosis is important. I mean, even the societies that like you and I are coming from, like often they're traced back to Greek civilization. These ideas of democracy and republics and morality and all down to like exercise, holistic points of view, liberal arts education, governance. But those guys had an idea of gnosis. They had an idea of truth. And they were also almost assuredly going in for very specific times, sacrificing, going into isolation, working in ceremony, and having these revelatory experiences, which they said pointed them to truth. And even like the founding fathers of our country, they would say things like, nature is truth. You find truth by observing nature. Like, by observing nature, you're able to see that which is real. And because also nature is creative, it's constantly regenerating. It's that creative force, and you can see it in everything. Like if you go in a forest, you can, especially in the Amazon, I mean, you can almost literally see plants growing. They're growing so fast. It's that
Right.
creative energy that's fulfilling itself like incessantly, constantly, over and over. And we don't it's very rare that we would really experience that like in its full force, because it's overwhelming. I mean, even you look at the stars and it's almost mind-boggling. But even if you're sitting in a forest, I mean, if you really think about the energy, that creative force that's flowing through everything, if you really go deeply into that, it's almost too much. But that plant medicine experience can induce that. And when
Mm-hmm.
one really begins to see that, that's part of where that ego death experience comes. It's also where that kind of humility begins to come in, is this creative force can be tapped into, and it's so overwhelming, so awe-inspiring, so beyond our wildest imagination that we just have to sit there in awe. And I think that's what
Yeah.
people are referring to as truth, because what there's nothing that's even minusculely, I don't know if that's a word, comparative to that. It's so all encompassing, so overwhelming that everything fades into that. Everything dissolves into that. And
Mm.
all we can say about it is some word like, well, that's God. That's truth.
Right.
That's the
Right.
light. Because what else can we do? That's
Yeah, yeah, and there's also the destruction
mm-hmm.
in nature, which is part of it. Just like you're saying, with like, it's not all good. There's also that other aspect there as
Mm-hmm.
well, which is the paradoxical nature. Because I think that in that fully encompassed together with what we would call good and bad together is sort of a version. Like maybe that is true. Like that's true. That's ultimate.
Mm-hmm.
That creative, destructive, chaotic, organized, beautiful harmony of nature, which we are. That's the magnitude that you're talking. I've experienced. It's so profound. It's like disgusting and gross and vile and grotesque and destructive, and then also
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and magnificent and radiant and joyful and exuberant, all together
Mm-hmm.
in one. And that does seem like a difficult concept for most people to uh, accept, because I think, like you were saying before, I can't do it with words. I think that's something that needs to be felt and experienced, right?
Yeah. The Tao Te Ching tries to do it. They say the Tao which can be spoken of is not the true Tao.
Right, right.
And this idea that from the Tao emerged the one, which is even pointing to this idea that even when we say something is one, it's not true anymore. It's
Mm, mm,
already it's one layer removed. But so then from the one came the two, came the duality. Then they would say from the two came the three, which is the Trinity. And then from the three, they would say came the 10,000 things, which is an ancient word for like everything. Um, on a side note, a really fascinating guy, his name is Daniel Tammet. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He wrote a book called Born in a Blue
mm,
Day. He has, I think, Asperger's syndrome, but he's a really
mm.
fascinating guy. And he has this thing called synesthesia. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, he things have a very like felt sense, like an emotional quality, a certain landscape, a certain color, a texture. And he became famous because he could do all of these like crazy mathematical computations. But he's also really fascinating because he kind of trained himself to be what we would call socially normal. A lot of people who have these conditions, I don't know if it's correct to say that they're socially not normal or we're socially not normal, but there's a difficulty in being able to communicate in a way that we both can connect on. But he kind of trained himself to be able to speak and be around what we would maybe consider like normal social behavior. And so he's able to explain himself. And one thing I found really fascinating with him is through doing these incredibly complex mathematical computations, for him, every number has a certain shape, a color, a texture, an emotional field, a landscape. And so when he's doing these computations, he just sees like this emotional, color, textured landscape. And that's how he just like reels off these numbers. And they just kind of come together. But it was fascinating because for him, every number is unique like color, shape, feel, everything from 1 until 10,000. And then after that, the cycle repeats itself for him, which I
Mm,
found
mm.
fascinating. Um,
Wow,
but yeah,
interesting.
that kind of that, as you were saying, it's hard to put in words. People try to, I think like the Tao, that example works. That idea of the Trinity, you see that in Christianity, you see it in Hinduism. The Brahman is the creative, the God, I guess you could call that which encompasses everything. So not just the creative, but that
Hmm.
which encompasses everything. And then the creative force is Brahma, the life sustaining force is Vishnu, and the
Mm-hmm.
destructive force is Shiva. So I think they're
Mm.
also putting it in a beautiful archetypal way of, yes, like those are in the terms of the Trinity, that's how you can break down the oneness into three different forces. You have the creative force, you have the force that sustains, and you have the destructive force. And all three of those are essential for duality, which are essential for the one. So creation can't exist without destruction. So I think sometimes when we're talking about the creative force, that entails that destructive force, because from a dualistic point of view, you can't have creation without destruction. Those two, they're synonymous with each other. In order to create, something also has to die. That's the transference of energy, that kind of physics principle that we all learn in school, that energy can't be created or destroyed, it's only transformed. So the creative destructive aspect of that is that transformation of energy. So yeah, I mean the destructive force is crucial. That's even in the
Mm.
dualistic point of view, that's the masculine and the feminine. The feminine is the creative life force, that which gives birth. The masculine is that which takes life, that's that which destroys. And
Mm.
but the creative force can't exist without the destructive force. The destructive force can't exist without the creative force. And destroying
Yeah,
it,
there's
destroying is
something.
very powerful. Like it's something we also forget about. Like
Right,
that
right.
uh, even in plant medicine work, we often talk about like removing these layers. Like rather than like gaining something, we're removing something. That's the destructive force. Like we're letting these things go. We're removing ourselves of them. The lifting of the veil. You know, there's a destructive force quality of that. We're taking the veil off. We're letting it go. And through the destructive, the creative force is born. Now I can truly see. Now I see life in its creation. And so, yeah, all of these things have a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and I'm noticing also the parallel between what you were just describing before as the dreaming state in the shamanic Shipibo way, and also with Vishnu and Brahma. Isn't it like he dreams the dream into existence in the
Mm-hmm.
universe, and right? It's so there's all that too. And then I was thinking of also, I forget what it was like Arjuna and Krishna arguing about time and love, and how love is beyond time's reach. So
Mm-hmm.
with the apocalypse is the lifting of the veil, the end of time. Maybe it's a step into the timelessness of love,
Yeah.
which I would bucket love and freedom, I think, are, you know, very similar, right? I think like in a way that's this like over expanding, liberated feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, we can obviously draw distinctions, but there's something true and good and life giving. And that's what I love. I love that you brought that onto the show today, because that just really resonates with me. If it's true and good and life giving, that's where we want to be heading to.
Yeah.
And
And that's like on an emotional level, like if you look, because we were talking about fear, the opposite of that um, is usually considered excitement. It's the same emotion. It's just fear is usually looking at the future and labeling it as bad. Like I often use the example of like two people going up a roller coaster, and it's like they're starting to get closer to the top. They're about to go over. The guy in the left, he's thinking about the future. He's thinking about when they go over that final, peak, and it's about to go crazy, down this huge thing. He's thinking, "Oh my god, like no, please stop. It's going to be horrible. I'm going to vomit. I'm going to die." It's fear because he's thinking about the future and he's labeling it as bad, as an aversion. That's the Buddhist idea. There's
yeah,
an aversion to it. The
right.
guy in the right, the same thing is happening. They're going up. They get to that peak, and he's thinking, "This is going to be amazing. I've never been on a roller coaster this fast. It's going to be the best thing ever. I can tell all my friends." And da da da. Wow, that the force going down. It's going to be amazing. he's feeling the same emotions. Like if you look at them physiologically, probably their hearts are racing, they're getting sweaty, they're like their body is preparing for it, the adrenaline's going. But the guy on the right, he's looking at the future and labeling it as good. In Buddhist terms, he's craving it. So there's excitement. And so it's the same thing, but one is fear and one is excitement. But as you said, I think in a more spiritual point of view, the opposite of fear is love. And because fear, again, is operating from that place of it's not life-giving, it's separating, it's dividing us. Again, you think about the pandemic.
Right.
The antidote to that fear is love. You know, can my actions reach out in love? Can I bring people together? If I'm a mother and my kid is sick, I mean, you know, when I was a kid, if I got sick, my mother gave me chicken soup. She put like a cold towel on my forehead. She took care of me. That's coming from a place of love, rather than looking at my kid as sick and being like, oh my God, he has the virus. He's going to get me sick. He's going to kill everyone. No, like, you know, and that love transforms, it transmutes. It's what heals the world. And the fear is ultimately what takes us out of that state, you know, that natural state. And that's why I think, as you said, like love is also related to this idea of freedom, of truth, like with a capital T. You know, it's that which is life-giving. It's that which is true. It's that which nurtures us. It's that which feeds us. It's that which gives us energy. It's that which inspires. You know, inspire, it means to be filled with spirit, to be filled with life. You know, when we're deceased, when we expire, the spirit it leaves our body. So yeah, that principle of love is huge. And again, that's one of those tricky things where like a lot of people in these lines of work, they love to speak about love.
Right.
But how aligned are their actions to actually loving? I mean, you know, I got COVID pretty early on in the pandemic, and I was pretty shocked at the response of people who were considered plant doctors. Like they didn't want to be near me. And you know, I'm not an angel or a saint, but if I call myself a doctor, then my responsibility is to go into sickness, to help people. You know, someone comes to me and they say I'm sick. I don't go, oh no, like stay back, stay away from me. It's no, how can I help you? That's what a doctor does. And even more than a doctor, that's what a human being does. That's what someone who's filled with spirit does, is they reach out in love to those around us. It's a beautiful Native American prayer, and one of the lines in that is reach out. It says, be strengthened by the love within. Reach out in love to those around us. For each day is a gift given but once. And so, you know, who do we want to be? Because this may be our last day. Do we want to live in that state of fear and isolate from others, label others, be afraid of others? Or do we want to reach out and love to those around us? Because this may be our last day. So how do we want to live our life? From a place of love or from a place of fear?
Do we truly want to put it all out there and go give everything that we have and show everything that we are and live, you know, to the fullest, whatever that means to each person? Or do we just want to survive and get by and make it until the end, which doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Because as you said, the end could be anytime. And that's
one of the things, you know, I think that I really saw with the pandemic too is, you know, and it's not to say that we shouldn't do anything or we shouldn't take precautions. I mean, for sure. Like that's why we have a house, you know, that's why we build walls around us so that we're somehow protected from the elements. You know, it's not just like, well, I'm just, whatever happens, you know, whatever, I'm not going to do anything. No, like when you operate from a place of love, you can still do things. You can build a house, you can protect your family. But to what degree, like even this idea of isolating ourselves, like wearing masks, being afraid of people, like, is that life-giving? You know, maybe you can argue, you know, I don't know, again, this is individual, maybe you can argue and somehow it is, but you know, to me it very much seems like coming from this place of fear, it's ultimately not life-giving. Like if we're so afraid of death that we're literally stopping life, we're stopping life in order to avoid death, and that's only going to lead to more death, to more fear,
Yeah.
to more despair.
Can you say that again? Say,
this
say that
idea
again.
that by trying to avoid death, we're stopping life
Yeah.
because we're so afraid of what death may be that we want to retreat from life. We want to put up all of these artificial walls, these artificial boundaries, these rules and regulations that keep us seemingly safe, but it's also keeping us from life because we are human beings. You know, we are individuals, but we don't exist in a void. Like we need touch, we need humanity, we need to see people smile, we need to hug people, we need to embrace people, we need to give each other a pat on the back, we need to talk to people. We need to have that interaction. Like we're not hermits, and
Yeah.
and if we don't if we don't embody what it means to be a human, then you could make the case that we're already dead. So like what are we avoiding? And you know, to I think as anyone who's had any sort of addiction or problem or suffering, like often a huge part of that is it's an avoidance of life. It's an avoidance of like truly going in and feeling all that life has to give. And so we do things. We isolate ourselves. We take drugs. We watch Netflix all day. We watch porn. We eat tons of food. But in that, there's like a fundamental thing where we're avoiding life. We're cutting ourselves off from that life giving energy, and ultimately that only leads to our demise. And if it's leading to our demise, it's leading to the demise as a whole too, because we're an integral part
Right.
of this world.
Wow. Well said, Jason. Very well said. So you're in the middle of a dieta.
I am. Yeah, more towards the beginning, but yeah, in the midst of one.
Okay, yourself or facilitating?
Facilitating one. Yeah, I do a lot of work
Great.
with a friend and colleague of mine. Her name is Merav. So yeah, we're here in the Valley running a diet. It's about 1 month, and yeah, that's a lot of the work I do now. So when we met, I was facilitating ayahuasca ceremonies at the Temple of the Way of Light. I'm still there, but on a more part-time basis, and a lot was because of the pandemic too. It really shifted things, and also I think just a point in my life, like wanting to be a bit more rooted and kind of focusing on some different things. But yeah, a big part of my work now is giving dietas, like working with different plants, especially with tobacco, and uh, kind of sharing and what, in a way, I was kind of gifted, like an experience of being able to share that. So
Yeah. Cool. I noticed that you have one coming up in a couple months, right? Like, do you have, what
yeah,
was it?
in
Sorry. It was,
in May
yeah,
in
tobacco
Ireland.
dieta in Ireland.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that should be
Great.
great. Unfortunately,
And I think it's
if
sold
anyone
out,
is
right?
if anyone's listening, yeah, we sold out crazy fast. We sold out in like, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. So I feel super fortunate for that. But yeah, if anyone is interested, I think after Ireland, we're doing a bit of a world tour. We'll see how it goes. I'm I'm already feeling I kind of like being in one spot more, but also with the way the world is going, it's getting difficult for people to kind of travel and move. So yeah, we're in Ireland in May, and then Merav, who I work with, she's from Israel, so we're going to be in Israel the next month in June, and then we go back to New York in July. And I believe there are still availability for the Israel and New York retreats.
Great, awesome, yeah. And who would you say should attend if anyone out there is listening is curious? What kind of person are you most excited about having be a part of this journey that you're offering?
The people we usually work with are people who have experienced plant medicine in some regards. Maybe they've worked with ayahuasca, or they've done an ayahuasca workshop, or they've worked with psilocybin, and or even people who just feel some sort of connection to plants. Often there's some kind of inner knowing that they'd like to go deeper into that work. And so the ability to do a dieta, I think, really gives someone that ability to experience these plants in a different way, and to experience oneself in a different way. A lot of the work we do works in that dream space and that kind of shamanic level of cleaning and clearing and realigning and looking at things in a new way. I think tobacco is really, really good medicine in that way. And it's interesting because in the beginning we were talking about how we were both kind of surprised that so many people in this plant medicine community seem to be following these kind of paradoxical viewpoints of being for cognitive liberty or freedom of choice to work with plants, but in another regard, not for that at all. And something I actually came to see, and I've also had to question myself, like, is this just my own bias? But I think it's something more than that, which is, you mentioned Amika, who I think is an amazing human being, an amazing teacher. I've sat with him
Yeah.
a number of times now, and he has this beautiful story about how there was this like deep suffering of humanity, and from that suffering, that call for help was heard from these beings in the star system Sirius, which is very fascinating because all over the world, a lot of people say like this kind of more advanced intelligence or spirits came from Sirius. So take from that what you will, but that they heard the calling, and they ended up transcending the 12 dimensions of time and space, and they showed up on the earth in this primordial anaconda canoe, and they brought with them all of these different medicines to help humanity remember who they were, where they came from. And there was kind of an order in this canoe, and the first plant was actually tobacco. And tobacco you can consume different ways. You can drink it. You can take it as a paste. You can, as you were saying, the rape and Amika's tradition, the tubu, they call it murundi. There's different ways you can apply it. So that was the first plant, along with coca. And these plants were the base, and they were the plants that also pointed towards truth. And again, allowing you to see things how they actually are, bringing integrity to the word and bringing sweetness. The coca brings sweetness to the word. The tobacco brings integrity to the word. And then the other plants kind of moving down the canoe. Hopefully I'll get this right. But then I think there was these plants, and they were very much like plants of the earth, plants of the heart, which are peyote and wachuma, or San Pedro. So they begin to open us to this world, like to really see this world. And then there's a plant that they call borrachera or towe, which kind of teaches one to be a doctor, but it's also it's a very powerful plant, but one you have to work with a lot of caution because it's very, very strong. And if it's not worked with correctly, you can end up in a bad way. And then the final plants, he would call the queens of knowledge. And he calls it Gemaru, which is actually marijuana. Yopo, which is kind of similar to ayahuasca. It's also DMT, but it's inhaled, and ayahuasca. And I think they would also put iboga in that category. And those are the plants of knowledge. Like they allow us to transcend the 12 dimensions. They bring this like very high knowledge. But something I began to see, and again, I don't know that this is inherently true, but it's something I began to sit with a lot, and it seemed to resonate that I think a lot of the people who maybe haven't been able to stand strong to those principles, in a way, they become a bit lost in the mediación of the plants of knowledge. Like the knowledge is there, they've experienced it, but it hasn't become embodied. It hasn't become of this earth. And so, like in shamanic terms, they would say one is lost in the mediación, one is lost in the dizziness, but they haven't been able to take that knowledge from above and bring it to below. That's kind of the esoteric principle of as above, so below. That's kind of what we were talking about. Like you understand it at this level, this more mental level, but it's not embodied. We haven't taken it from there and embodied it into this earth. And I think tobacco is a really powerful plant, and probably why it was the first one in the canoe, because if you have that, then you're better able to integrate this knowledge and really bring it into this existence. Similar to wachuma or peyote. It's like it's becoming more embodied in this world. And I think, ayahuasca is amazing. I would recommend it to anyone who feels that call. But also to realize that all plants have their medicine, and all plants have their archetypes, and all plants have their place. And sometimes we need one plant more than another, much like medicine, like we were talking about. There's not necessarily one medicine that's good for us all the time in every single circumstance. So it was something I was thinking about, of a lot of the people that I kind of saw that maybe had those conflicting principles. They tended to be working with these plants that were more in that the queens of knowledge realm, but that maybe what they were lacking was these plants in the first part of the canoe that allowed them to really see things as they actually are and stand in that principle, stand in the word, have integrity in the word, have sweetness to the word. So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Love that story. Beautifully said. And what it represents. Yeah. And I'm just thinking what comes to mind is if you're in a canoe and you only have one section filled out, like you're going to be top, heavy. You're going to be balanced. You're going to be unbalanced. The top of the canoe is going to go up. You're going to sink into the water. Yeah. So it's very important. Really well said. Thank you for bringing that Amika story into this and what it represents. And I think that is, that's powerful. So
I never thought about that. That's a great analogy. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, you're doing good work, my friend. I think, that the recognition that there's more to this plant path, that it's not just about the knowing, but it's about the gnosis and the embodiment and really going on that deep journey into that dream space. How do you want to create? Where do you create from? What you create from is what you create. And you're a guy I consider with deep integrity and principle, and it shows. I think that it's not something that you have to say. It's by in your presence, being in ceremony with you a couple times, and just the way you carry yourself and facilitate. It's just a known, felt thing that you get from somebody who is embodied. So yeah, good stuff, man.
Oh, thank you, brother.
You're doing it. Yeah, you're welcome. What? Just we'll end here. I mean, what is the most fulfilling and nourishing, satisfying aspect of doing this work for you?
It's interesting because I think a lot of people approach this work from this altruistic point of view, like, I want to help people and I want to save the world. And for me, it didn't start that way at all. It started kind of, I guess we could call it a more selfish place. But as we were talking about it, like I had questions that I wanted to answer myself. I had issues that I wanted to deal with. And so it was really, for me, it was a path of self-discovery, of self-knowledge, of curiosity. And I often use like this example of martial arts because I love jujitsu and it's taught me so much. But I kind of see it as a similar thing. Like when I started jujitsu, and any good jujitsu teacher who I've ever worked with, none of them started like I want to be a jujitsu teacher. It always started like I want to get really good at jujitsu. And then as you start to get good, it just happens where someone sees that and they're like, hey, man, like I'm struggling with this move. I see you do it really well. Could you help me with that? And it's like, yeah, sure. Like, this is how I do it. This is what I know. Hopefully it works. And if it doesn't, we can work on it. That's an amazing thing about teaching too, is you get to see things from another angle. There's more clarity. I realize, he's doing what I taught him, but it's not working. So maybe I'm not doing something right. So I have to then refix my game and hone. And in that way, things just really came organically. So, I think often when people ask that question, they're expecting me to say like, oh, I love seeing these people like grow. And I do. It's beautiful. But I think for me, there's even something deeper than that, which is there's something that drew me to this work that I'm still on my own journey. And if I'm able to help people, I do what I can. And, but for me, it's always fascinating working with people and seeing the transformation they go through. And I think that's something you probably saw at the temple too, is you do a workshop and people come in a certain way and they leave and they're very different. And it's also something that like anything, the more we do something, we become a bit desensitized to it. But sometimes when I really just sit back and I'm looking at a group of people or an individual, and there's just this sense of like awe. I think a deep gratitude for these traditions and where they came from, and the knowledge that's been kept and passed down and that's still given, which is not the most obvious thing. Like there's a lot of reasons why it may not be given for all sorts of past reasons. But in a way, just a real gift. And I think for me, something that I find very fascinating and that always interests me is this idea of who we are and where we come from. And I think these plants have an amazing ability to help us on that path. And it's also why I'm so fascinated. And I think, probably you are too. I think we talked about this, people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and ever since I was a kid, I was pretty fortunate to be able to travel and going to these different countries, like going to Peru, and you see these massive boulders and just fitting together perfectly. But then above those are some that aren't quite as nice. And then above those are like some that don't really fit together at all. And they're much smaller. And so ever since I was a kid, I remembered like, it seems like there's a story that we haven't been told. And it seems like there was this knowledge that was present and embodied, and that we lost it somehow, whether it was a cataclysmic event, and yet these traces remained, and they remained in these traditions that work with these plants. You see it in the Vedas, like you read the Vedas, which is the oldest knowledge we have. And in the Vedas, they say, well, all of this knowledge was given to us by the ancient ones. It's like, what? So there's people even before you who even knew more, who passed this on. And so for me, there's something very magical about this. And it's certainly not that I'm walking around all day in awe. I mean, most of my life is very rational and just doing things. But there are certainly times where I tap into that awe, and it's incredible. And I think that, to answer your question, is probably like what inspires me, is when I kind of begin to connect the dots and begin to see or understand something, and then it's all shattered. And then I, trying to understand it again on a deeper level. And it's like some people also in like shamanic terms, they would say that's the great game of life, is somehow thinking we know and then realizing we know nothing. And then sing something that's just, so beautiful and so profound, and just constantly in that game, in that dance. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Yeah, I'm not going to get a typical answer from you. Come on, I knew that. But that's perfect. That's a beautiful answer. It's a true answer. It's a real one, and it's great. You're truly unique and special person because of you and just living this journey and living this path. And if people want help, they come, and you're welcome to give them that. And we're all in it together, in a sense. And I love that. Yeah, like Ram Dass, walking each other home. So
Yeah.
cool. Thanks for taking on that role and being that, that person and carrying on these traditions and this wisdom. It's essential, especially in our time now. We don't let this stuff die, that we keep it going. Go listen to the Universe Within podcast, because Jason's doing something that nobody else is doing, as far as I'm concerned, which is bringing on these teachers, these maestros, these healers, to speak directly. And I believe that your last episode was with one of your main teachers, Ernesto, before Damian you had on, who I know quite well. So yeah, a really amazing job that you're doing here with the podcast and bringing these healers on to speak in their own words and speaking with them. It's a truly unique thing. I don't see anybody else doing that. So well done. Go check out the Universe Within podcast, and nicotinorustica.org as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a link to my website. It's got the work we're doing and any upcoming retreats we're doing. You can find it all there.
Cool.
And likewise, brother.
Awesome.
We were talking about Amika, and it's something that has really stuck with me, and it's one of the other legends or tales that he speaks of, and kind of similar. That's why I really like Amika, because he's also there's not a lot of like fluffy stuff, and there was this tale of that his people, the Tubu, that their grandfathers, they use the word abuelo, which translates to grandfathers, but it's grandparents, so the men and women, but that their ancestors had this tale that their time was coming to an end, that way of being was coming to an end, and that this time we're coming into was going to be the age of, as he calls it, the Diro Amasa, which is the children of the new dawn. And they're the people who are able to bridge the medicines of the four directions, which I think is super important. It's to realize that all the directions have medicine: the north, the west, the east, the south. They all have their medicine. They're all wisdom keepers. They all have a unique way of working with medicine, and bridging the medicine of the four directions to create a new Maloka. And in the Amazon, a Maloka, it's the communal house, but it also represents the world, and it represents the universe. So these Diro Amasa, they're bridging the medicines of the four direction to create a new earth. And something about that story really inspires me, and I consider you one of the Diro Amasa. It's the people, because what you're doing is also medicine, and we all have these very compartmentalized view of what medicine is. But medicine is that which heals, which means to bring into wholeness. And the power of the word is extremely important. For Amika, that's a huge part of their tradition, is the power of word, sharing, bridging ideas, talking about these things, investigating, separating the chaff, finding what's truth, and spreading that. And, that was also part of the idea of the podcast I did. And I think you're doing that wonderfully, bringing on all sorts of different people, talking about these ideas that are super important, like liberty, freedom. They're no small topics, and they are life and death. And sometimes I think we've been living in a time that's been kind of complacent. It's been quite easy in a way. But these things are always there, and they always resurface. And it takes people who are strong, who stand in principle, who are willing to speak up. And that's who changes the world. And it's no small thing. So it's a pleasure, brother. Thank you very much. I think this is the third time I've been on now. So it's the podcast I've been on the most times. So thank you for having me on. And yeah, man, I always really appreciate talking to you and catching up. As we said, I think of you as a brother, and in this reality, and also in all realities, and in this quest that we're all on. So keep doing what you're doing, man. I saw you had Charles Eisenstein on the other day. He's amazing. He's another one of these guys who I think is really, a bridge keeper, someone who's trying to speak truth. And the more these voices get out there, the better. And even though there is a lot of darkness in the world, I see a lot of signs for hope. And
Sure.
you giving voice to yourself, to these people, that's what it's about, because we do all have fear. And the more opportunity we have to hear other points of view, the more opportunity we have to stand with other people who are taking a stand, it makes that journey not easy, but definitely easier. And the more people that do it, the more people we can bring in to truly create a new earth. So keep it up, my friend.
Yeah, you as well. Likewise, I feel the same. Thank you so much. And we're just building a new Maloka together. So let's make it fun. Let's make it enjoyable, and let's just keep focused on the project and the task at hand. And I think it's going to be coming along pretty nicely. And if not, well, see you in the next incarnation, I guess.
Yeah, sounds good, brother. Whenever you publish this, let me know, and I'll do my best to share it. And yeah, we just keep going. In Spanish,
just keep going.
Spanish, they say poco a poco, paso a paso, or poco a poco, baso a baso. Little by little, step by step, or little by little, glass by glass, we keep going forward.
Yeah, that's all there is to do.
Yeah,
let's do it. keep putting the good life-giving energy out there, my friend.
Yeah. Well, likewise, brother. It's been a pleasure. And great catching up with you, man. Good to see you. Looks like your studio's coming along too. You got some insulation in there.
Yeah.
You got a nice bookshelf going.
It's not bad. Yeah. All right, we're going to have a little chat off air. And to all of you listening, thank you. And until next time, much love. Peace.
All right, everybody, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mike. I really enjoyed sitting with him. I think he led it really well, and we got into some really, I think, deep and important topics. So I hope you enjoyed that interview. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good way. For as little as $1 a month, you can sign up. There's different tiers you can sign up for, and those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. So that's a really big help to all the people who have done that. Thank you very much. One of the reasons I like that is I think it's very much built around this idea of Aini, this Andean idea that's a really fundamental part of their cosmovision, which is this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast and you'd like to give back, that's a really big help to me. There's also the ability to direct donate via PayPal. I'll put a link to all those in the show notes. Also with the YouTube channel, you can join the YouTube channel. It gives you a lot of the same perks as the Patreon page. And then if you're not able to do that, if you're listening on the YouTube version, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos, that's a really big help with the algorithms to get the show out to a bigger audience. And then with the audio version, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leaving a starred rating and a short review. And also with Spotify now, it gives you the ability to rate the show as well. So and then also, if you enjoyed this conversation, really consider checking out Mike's work. He's got an amazing podcast. It's called Mikeadelic. I listened to one of his shows recently, and it had Charles Eisenstein on, who's a really fascinating guy. So he's doing really great work over there. So if you like this conversation, consider checking out his work. Again, Mikeadelic, and you can find it on all of the major platforms. So I think that's it. When this podcast is being released, it'll probably be towards the end of April. I'm shooting a number of these in advance because I'm actually heading off to do a dieta myself, so I'm going to be offline for a few weeks. So I'm not sure the order of the guests who are coming on after this, but as always, I try and bring on some really fascinating people. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the support, and I will see you all on the next episode.